This is Alara, and the document she was holding offered her $10 million to disappear. For most ladies, it is a fortune. For her, it was an insult. Her husband, Alexander, didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to erase her, to prove she was just another transaction. But Alexander made one fatal mistake. He forgot that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. He forgot the first rule of his own game: always read the fine print. 5 years ago, Alara was a promising art curator. Alexander was a venture capitalist king. A man who built empires on leverage and loopholes. He was charm incarnate, and he loved her. Like he loved his vintage car or his penthouse view, a beautiful possession. Their prenuptial agreement was his masterpiece. 100 pages of legalese, designed to protect his fortune. But nestled within it was Clause 7b, the Infidelity Clause. If Alara was ever unfaithful, she would leave with nothing, not a penny. It was his insurance policy, a way to ensure control. What he never imagined was that Alara, a student of art and history, would become a student of him. She saw his patterns, his assistants who never stayed long, the late nights that smelled of another woman's perfume. Alara felt like she was in a cage, a gilded cage that had invisible bars, and she felt them closing in. One night, while Alara was at a charity gala, she saw Alexander across the room, laughing with a beautiful young woman. His hand rested on the small of her back, a moment too long. Alara's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. That night, she sat at her computer, researching not infidelity, but corporate infidelity. She found articles on shell companies, embezzlement, and hidden assets. That was the night she decided to fight, but not with tears or accusations. That was what he expected. She needed a weapon he would never see coming. She realized Clause 7b only mentioned her infidelity. It said nothing about his infidelity. And it said absolutely nothing about what would happen if she discovered he was stealing from his own company. For 18 months, Alara waged a silent war. She became a ghost in his machine. She learned about Ethelred Holdings, a shell company in the Cayman Islands. She documented everything. Millions of dollars. Siphoned away from investors. From pensions. She wasn't gathering evidence of an affair. She was gathering evidence of a federal crime. She was a woman on a mission. The art curator had become a forensic accountant. The loophole wasn't in the prenup. It was in his own criminality. She knew the day would come, the day when he would ask for a divorce, and she was determined. Determined not to simply disappear. Soon, the news of his affair became public. A particular blonde featured by his side more often. She knew that that day she had prepared for had finally arrived. When Alexander's lawyer presented the divorce settlement, he expected gratitude. He expected a signature. What he got was a counteroffer. A single sheet from Alara, detailing the existence of Ethelred Holdings, the account numbers, and the exact amounts embezzled. It wasn't a request for money. It was a statement of fact. And it ended with a simple, devastating question. Shall I send this to the SEC? Or would you prefer I take it to the New York Times first? The lawyer trying not to show it. Panicked. For the first time, Alara held all the power. The infidelity clause was meaningless. She hadn't broken their vows. She had his weakness. And she would expose his crimes if her conditions were not met. The new settlement gave her $50 million. Full ownership of the penthouse, 2 limited edition cars, and a legally binding, non-disclosure agreement from him. She wasn't escaping with her life. She was seizing a part of his. Alexander's lawyer left the penthouse. Shocked and hurried, he called Alexander. "Alex, your wife made a counter-offer," he said, and he went on to explain to Alexander. Alexander's world was built on control. And in an instant, Alara had shattered it. Alexander stormed into the penthouse, the air crackling with his fury. But Alara was waiting, calm and poised, sitting in the very chair where he used to hold court over his domain. Alara was sitting calmly, a cup of tea in front of her. The two documents are on the table, the original settlement and her counteroffer. What is this? A joke? You think you can blackmail me? Alara answered him calmly. It's not a joke, Alexander. It's a choice. You can either be ruined publicly and go to prison, or you can sign this new agreement and keep your freedom. Though, I imagine your reputation will take a hit. He lunged for the USB drive on the table. But Alara was quicker. She picked it up and held it in her hand. It's encrypted, and there are copies. You know I'm not bluffing. The realization dawned on him that he has been outmaneuvered. He sank into the chair opposite her. For the first time in their marriage, Alexander saw Alara not as his wife, but as his equal, no, his superior. She had played the long game, and she had won. But then he smiled a cold, calculated smile. You're right, I underestimated you. But you've made one mistake, my dear. You've shown me your hand. Now I know what you have. And I will find a way to break you. Alara met his smile with one of her own. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, but held a secret he had yet to uncover. You're wrong, Alexander. This isn't my hand. This is just the first card I've chosen to show you. Alexander, defeated, signs the new agreement and leaves the penthouse without a backward glance. The deal was done. Alara was now a free woman, and a wealthy one, but as she watched Alexander leave, she knew this wasn't over. He was a man who never accepted defeat. He would be back, and she had to be ready. As she stood at her now empty penthouse, looking at the city lights, a small, satisfied smile played on her lips. She picked up the USB drive, and then she dropped it into a glass of water, destroying it. Alara had won. She got everything she asked for. $50 million, the penthouse and 2 limited edition cars. But as she looked at the USB drive that held her freedom, she made a choice. She destroyed it. Because the truth was, the evidence on that drive was a decoy. The real, encrypted, and untraceable files were already in the hands of someone she trusted implicitly. The whistleblower had vanished, with a $2 million bonus from an anonymous donor. You see, Alara didn't just find a loophole. She didn't just win her freedom. She executed a hostile takeover of her own life. And as for Alexander, he was probably thinking that the sword hanging over his head was gone. He had no idea that it was merely replaced by one he could not see, held by a woman who has learned to love the quiet before the storm. Alara picked up her phone and dialed a number and said, I am done with him. Thanks for your help. The female voice chuckled and responded, Congrats, Alara. It is now my turn. Alara had created a shield that would protect her for the rest of her life. She had uploaded the main files onto a secured server. If anything happened to her, Alexander would be destroyed. He would know that, and she made sure he knew. It was the ultimate checkmate. He could never even wish her harm, because if he acted on it, he would lose everything. 1 year later, Alara had built a new life, a life of her own design. She was free, not just from Alexander, but from the fear he represented. And Alexander, he was too busy fighting fires on multiple fronts to ever bother her again. The sword above his head was invisible, but it was real, and it was held by the woman he once thought he owned. Alara knew she would always be looking over her shoulder, but now she was the one holding the leash. She had turned her gilded cage into a fortress, and she was its queen.